Hello, Facebook and YouTube and interwebs in general. This is Jesus Stories, and actually our last one, right, David? This is it, the grand finale. And so we're glad that you're here with us today, whether you're live and in person with us, broadcasting at noon, or you're catching it later, posted and ready for you to find. We hope that you get something meaningful out of it. I feel excited because today we're going to dig into one of my favorite stories, John chapter 13, the time when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. So I'm excited to get to unpack that and learn something new about it today together. And for that purpose, I've got my friends with me to back me up, Jessica and David. And so I'm going to let them say who they are, what they do with most of the time, and most of their time, and what their favorite thing is to do in their free time.
All right. So I'm Jessica Green, and I am the Director of Spiritual Formation here at Silva First. And most of my time is devoted to communicating and making plans for children's ministries. And I would say my favorite thing to do in my free time is, if I was honest, I love to nap. I really love to nap.
I support you in your napping.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good morning or good noon. I am David Reeves. I'm one of the preachers up at the Cullowhee Methodist Church. And I guess my favorite part-time activity is to fact check Mary Brown. So.
I look forward to that today, David. And I'm Mary Brown. I get to do the pastoring thing here at Silva First United Methodist Church. And my favorite thing to do in free time, which I don't get to do very much, is probably snowboarding. I like to snowboard. But it is neither the season of the year nor the season of life for me to do that a whole lot right now.
How's been this last couple of months? Is it?
No, this past couple months, not so great. This winter, though, it was good. So anyway, back to Jesus Stories. So here's how this is going to work. We have this foot washing story split up for us in two chunks. And so each time Jessica's going to read for us a part of it. You can be ready to follow along with your Bibles by turning to John chapter 13. And I would recommend, if you've got a Bible at home, for me, I remember things better. I can mark the page right in there, underline what you find important so you can reflect on it again later. And so after we read a passage, then we'll try to immerse ourselves in that story. And we want you to be there with us. So there's a little bit of a delay. If we take a minute to get to your comments or to notice them, don't be discouraged. But before we move on from each passage, we'll check in. And so if you think of questions that you want to ask or comments that you want to add in, you just feel free. And already I've noticed Mary Slagle, Connie Dillard are telling us hello. That's all. We love that. We love knowing that you're out there. So you just feel free to chime right in.
And you might also mention that if you see us checking our phone, it doesn't mean that we're not paying attention. We're trying to answer these questions and get ready to respond to a comment.
Yes, I'm either looking at the comments or trying to cheat and find the answer on the internet. One of those two things if I'm looking at my phone.
Except for Mary, she's checking baseball scores.
All right, so are we ready to dig in, guys?
That's good.
So Jessica's going to start by reading the first part of John 13 for us.
So the first part of the scripture selection today is John 13, verses 1 through 11. And let's read it together. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and to go with the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it in the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but it is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean."
So I want to invite all of us, us here and y'all out there, to start by really trying to experience this story, to really allow ourselves to feel what it would have felt like. If we weren't in quarantine, I'd be tempted to do it right now for us to wash each other's feet. But we agreed that, that's probably a violation of social distancing. So in lieu of that, I want you to picture Jesus getting up from that table. Picture him taking the towel and getting it ready, pouring the water into the basin, and then starting to wash the disciples' feet. And to think about just what that would have felt like. Allow yourself. For a lot of us, our feet are sensitive. I know I don't like my feet being touched at all. I'm really ticklish. And so imagine the feel of Jesus' hands on their feet, wet with water, rubbing their feet to get the dirt and the grime from the day's walk off. And then at the end, taking the towel and wiping their feet dry. And at the end, getting up and going back to his seat, leaving these dumbfounded disciples behind him. So with all that in mind, I want to invite us to really try to get into this story and to experience it like we were there. And as a good place to start, David and Jessica, I'm curious if y'all have ever participated in a foot washing. Have y'all ever had your feet washed?
I have not. Early on, I wasn't super familiar with this story. And I mean, this was a while ago. And one of my first experiences of even hearing of a foot washing was at a wedding that a friend had attended. And so that was the bride and groom did that for one another. At first, it was like, whoa. But now, knowing kind of the meaning behind it, it means that much more.
Mm-hmm. How about you, David?
I have on several occasions. It is, for me, a very awkward event. In part because what you said, I don't much like to have my feet touched. But also, almost always when that happened, it was at the hand of someone who was a colleague or my boss or something like that. So in a way, it was like a really good thing for me to help me understand this story. Because it helped us understand sort of how awkward it was for Peter and the other disciples at that moment where Jesus did this thing that they totally didn't expect him to do.
Yeah, I've participated in a lot of foot washings, mostly through Wilderness Trail, which David and Jessica have already given me a hard time for talking about again, and so we can just don't feel free like you need to comment about that. But I'd say. Maybe 40 or more times I've had my feet, because it's a part of every Wilderness Trail event. But even as many times, every time sitting in a chair feeling like it's all I can do to keep myself from jumping out of it is such a awkward, strange, and yet somehow beautiful experience. Like afterward, I always feel this kind of like strange, maybe grace is the only right word for it. It is very, very strange. So what do you think it would have been like to be one of the 12 disciples around the table?
Well, maybe a little historical context is in order here. I believe that most of those disciples would have been familiar with having their feet washed. I think that is something that they may have experienced in their own homes or in the places that they went, even if they were not wealthy. There were people whose job it was to help people get a bath and help get cleaned up. They were the people at the very end of the line in the service department. It was hard work, and not all that agreeable a work. So people were accustomed to having these folks around who did that, but they really were sort of the entry level servants.
And my understanding, you fact check me, is that it was like an act of hygiene, and so like. Again, see, David and I like to disagree with each other, so I know that he will if he thinks different. But my understanding is that tables in the ancient Near East were low to the ground. People sat not on chairs, but on pillows. Feet would be close to food, most likely, when you sit down for a meal. And also, I think this part is indisputable. People walked everywhere as a primary mode of transportation. And so when you got to a place, after walking there, your feet were dusty and dirty. And so I've heard the analogy that maybe in the same way that it is routine for us, especially right now, to wash your hands before you eat, that washing your feet before you eat was kind of a necessary thing of enjoying a meal without stinky feet by the food. Have you ever heard that before? Am I making all that up?
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. And for the record, I was just kidding when I said favorite things to fact check, Mary. People in that day lived in shelters that were much, much smaller. Their houses were smaller, their rooms were smaller. You did all kinds of things in one room. And for that reason, and for 1,000 other reasons, mostly because they hadn't invented tall tables yet, probably, everything that happens in the floor. So if the floor can't be clean, then nothing else can be clean. And so if your feet can't be clean, then the floor can't be clean. And all of us have had a grandparent, or most of us had a grandparent sometime or another who like were the feet police, like wipe your feet before you come in here, because they were worried that this place they had to live and do life wasn't clean. So it was an important function, making sure that your feet got clean. So important, really, that they got somebody to take care of it.
And I haven't really thought about this, but I don't know if this is making a leap, but like you can easily, like we wash our own hands, right? But washing your own feet is kind of a weird that you have to like sit down and get to the, I don't know if this is how, because that's what I'm thinking, like why wouldn't you wash your own feet? But that's what I've understood is that it was either a servant in the house whose role it was to wash the feet, or in the absence of a servant, if it's a very poor house, then it would be kind of like the job to the least, the last, like the lowest ranking person, right, is the one who would get ditched with that responsibility. And so here we have a situation where if this is the tradition, you got to wash your feet before you eat, someone's got to do it. And it's typically the servant or the lowest ranking person. In this situation, Jesus is the one who does it.
What I love about this, I love 1,000 things about this story. So I love that Jesus, when he went to the task, he kind of put on the uniform of the person who does this, which meant that in this case he sort of took off his cloak and was dressed like somebody who was going to be giving someone a bath. He moved to the place where that would happen. And all the time that he was doing that, I mean, it was like a deliberate act where he was going to be that person. He wasn't going to go play that person. He was going to go be that person. So Peter, come over here. Let's get your feet done. And that is just the most amazing thing, because the important thing for David Reeves in this story is there Jesus like proved that there's no job he was too good for. And I just think that's important.
Yeah, I'll confess every now and then, I mean, this is like full disclosure. Every now and then in ministry, I'll be doing some job, like maybe sometimes literally cleaning a toilet, right? Not out of the realm of possibility. And the thought will enter my head, like, I have a master's degree, right? Like, but like, this is Jesus debunking any kind of thinking like that, right? Like, don't you dare think like that. There is no job. You scrub that toilet.
This spot there. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah. So we know, as we think about what the disciples' reaction to this would have been like, we know Peter's reaction. Like, typically Peter, way over the top. So how does Peter react at first?
First, he didn't want him to wash his feet. And then he was like, well, wait a minute. Why don't you just wash my whole body? Give me all the water.
Like one extreme or the other, right? Like, no, not at all. Or, okay.
Bathe me.
I know. And in Jesus' answer, like, all of you's not clean. I feel like Jesus is like just shaking his head again at Peter. Like, come on, man.
I can't help but think that Jesus looked at Peter and said, look how big this bowl is. Like, no, we're not giving you a bath in this bowl.
That don't even make sense. So why do you think that Peter reacted that way? Or maybe better, we could just set that aside altogether. And how do you think you would have reacted as a disciple?
Do you want to weigh in on that before I do?
I probably would have been reluctant. That's the low of the low. But then when Jesus said, no, I will wash your feet, maybe the attitude would have changed. Like, whoa, this is Jesus is trying to teach me something here. I don't know. I'm interested.
I'm the oldest guy in the room by about 100 years. And I guess I went to school in the 60s and the 70s and to college in the 70s. And so I've got kind of a tree-hugging, dirt-worshiping view of this. And I think that when this happened, that Peter had been with Jesus forever. Or what seemed like forever. He was like Jesus's dude. He took care of stuff for him. Jesus and Peter understood each other. But Peter still was missing some parts. And I think that real humility may have been one of the parts that hadn't come to him yet. And here again, when Jesus gets up and doesn't play that part, he is that part. He intends to wash these people's feet because they need their feet washed. He's doing that most important thing that Jesus does. There is no job beneath what we're about here. And for Peter to learn that, I kind of like how it unfolded, although the story seems to be stylized a little bit because it's got those little editorial comments that are added, because they always have to talk bad about Judas Iscariot. And they got to add those little things. Jesus knew this and that. Which is not to say that those things are not true, but here I would have loved for the teller of this story to put something in there about this, where Jesus got up, took off his cloak. He was fixing to demonstrate to Peter and the other disciples that there is no job beneath us as disciples, and every job is important.
Well, I like what you said about Peter's not demonstrating a real humility yet, because even in his rejection of it, there's almost a lack of humility in that. Like, you're not going to wash my feet, And then in his over-the-top acceptance of it, I've heard humility is defined not that you're beneath me or I'm beneath you, but this kind of equality. I'm willing to serve you because I understand that you're just as important as me. I don't know. I might be getting off the beaten path there. Yeah.
We just thought we'd sit here really quiet and see what you did.
What do you think
well, there are a couple of things going on here that strike me. And one is Peter, and this gives me hope because I don't get things very quickly. But Peter goes straight from being kind of, no, you're not going to wash my feet because you're not the person whose job it is to wash my feet. That's beneath us. He goes straight from there to becoming sort of a consumer where he's like, oh, yeah, get this spot up here. And in a way kind of still doesn't quite get what Jesus is offering. But in fairness to Peter, there is so much going on in this story where Peter's not accustomed to being touched by Jesus in this manner. And I don't know what to compare that to, except I help look after my dad. He's lived a really long time, and he's very unwell now, and he's in hospice care. And for the longest time, we had to help him get his bath. And he hated that. He hated that. He never warmed up to the idea. And then when hospice care, God bless hospice, when they came in and started helping him get his bath, he just became like the most agreeable, pleasant person in the whole world, because this total stranger, whose kind of job it was to come do this, instead of this person that he's raised, came to help do this really personal thing. And so I think all that comes together, and maybe that's a good learning experience for us, where when we run into those places where like the really personal and the really vulnerable and the really uncertain things all come together in one place, it's probably just a sign that something really important's happening.
Well, and that's such a good, I had not quite thought, I think it's a great analogy. Like I think about when my mom got sick and having to help her, she was always like really strong and didn't need like any help with anything. And how awkward it felt to like do things like that for her. And but just the nature of who Jesus was to the disciples, which seems like stating the obvious, but I hadn't thought about it. Like, so with your dad, he can be served by the hospice staff, but by his family, that's different. And so for the disciples, we might assume they would have happily let some random servant wash their feet, and it wouldn't have been a big deal moment. The big deal of it, to state the obvious, is that it's Jesus, this person who is already intimate and known to them and has a role already established, how their relationship normally works, and Jesus is deviating from how what they would expect the relationship to play out like. Yeah. I feel like that. Go ahead.
Good, Mary. I agree.
Thank you, David.
No fact check.
I feel like that sets us up well. Let me check our comments. And as a reminder, it's so fun to see everyone we see Betty Brown, Stephanie Del Rio. This Della Reeves is with us.
Hey,
That's so nice. Kathleen Johnson Farmer.
Hey, Kathy.
Meta Jean Rast Smith. I like how we get full names sometimes on Facebook, like the full entirety. Rochelle, Steve White. So it's good to see all y'all out there. Remember, if you have comments or questions, we'll check this periodically, chime in with us. But I think we're at a good point to shift gears to the next half of the scripture reading, and we'll see what it has to say to us.
Yep. So the next half of the reading, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. I tell you this now before it occurs, so that when it does occur, that you may believe that I am he. Very truly I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who I send. Me. Sorry.
You're good. It's live.
Yeah.
Live and proven it. So I feel like this part of it, if I was one of the disciples sitting there, this would have been like the double shock of what's happening. So the first shock is just that Jesus washes their feet. And I just picture him sitting back down and they're all like dumbfounded. Like Jesus has done weird things up until now and said weird things up until now. This is even weirder. But on top of that, Jesus is making it clear that it's not just that he's done it for them, but now he wants them to do it too. So what I want us to do is to unpack that a little bit. Like, what do you think Jesus means when he tells the disciples that they ought to wash one another's feet?
This part of the story is wonderful because Jesus does so many different things. He shows up for the evening, the guy in charge, they're there because of him. He almost immediately takes off his coat, puts on the clothes of a servant and does the work of a servant. And that's an awkward moment, and I kind of like it that they're all in this fairly small room and they're having to watch it happen. Yeah. There's no escape. Yeah, I mean, so they're like they get their moment, but they're witnessing it as well. So it's a little different there, you know. So then after he does that, and that's still sort of, and hopefully that happens in your life all the time, where an event happens and you go like, what just happened? You know, and so it's banging around your head like some kind of ball bearing, and then before they get like figure out what's happened, Jesus has already put his robe back on, and he takes on the mantle of, this time, the teacher, where he said, let me explain to you what's happened here. So it isn't lost. And Jesus does that a lot in the Gospels, where when he tells a parable, then he'll get the disciples off somewhere and say, okay, just in case you missed it, here's what the seed is, and here's what the dirt is, and here's what so here again he's done that. He's explained to them, to be really clear, what has happened here. And I think it shouldn't be lost on us that in almost every really good storytelling event, you save the best for last. And one of the last things he said is, if I washed your feet, then your highest calling would be to wash one another's feet. Now, the washing the feet is a metaphor. It's whatever need you have, I think. But you demonstrate love by doing what people need.
Well, let's talk about it. I think it is a metaphor, but also, like, what makes this different from like communion, where Jesus says, break this bread, drink this cup, remember me? Like, why is communion a sacrament for us and foot washing isn't?
This is above my pay grade. Full disclosure. I'm not there yet.
I think it could be just the accident of who decided one would be and one would not. And before, like, the Methodist truth police start calling my house, in every religion, you have to have your sacraments. You have to have those things that are so important that you do them and remember that if you don't do them, then you really can't practice the faith. I guess they chose the one maybe because it had to do with food, and if you don't eat, you die. But I would be totally all right with that being a sacrament.
I've wondered. I mean, communion's in 3 Gospels. The foot washing's in 1. Arguably of similar sources and yada yada, all that stuff. But I don't know if that weighed in for early Christians, or I frankly, more than anything, have wondered if it's just foot washing is so awkward. Like when I've talked about doing it at churches, people are pretty hesitant. Or that's a nice idea, but I would rather you not wash my feet.
Or it just never happens.
Right.
You just keep kicking the can about it.
Well, and if you look at that as an event, your choice is to either get your feet washed, which I don't want, or to be a servant, which I'm not sure I want to be, which suggests that we really, really, really need that.
Right. And you know what? The way that you said that there, that we don't really want either role, tells me that maybe the word humility used earlier maybe is at the key of this. No matter what role you play in it, there's humility involved, because it's vulnerable to have people touch your feet, and it is vulnerable to touch someone else's feet.
Right. Mm-hmm. When you first came, like your first Easter season, I think, we had talked about doing a foot washing service. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, man, I don't know.
Quarantine saved us from that.
It did. And I'm like, I don't know. But I was willing to do it. I think because it is an experience that I want to participate in. And so I think everyone should do it at least once.
So one way to take Jesus's instruction to wash one another's feet is the literal. And I think that's part of it. But so often, like if we stop at the literal, we miss the deeper truth, right? And so I'm with you, David, that really the larger application is not that like we need to wash each other's feet literally, but that we need to embody this. And so how do we live into that? How do we wash one another's feet in a more figurative sense?
You talked about, of course, that may have been something you kind of made up to make your point, but you talked about cleaning up a bathroom somewhere. I think we all probably in our head have a list of jobs that we're fine to do and a list of jobs that we really don't think we ought to have to do. And that's okay because we, in the end, we have these jobs that we really do have to do or the thing doesn't move forward. But I think it's grayer and fuzzier than we imagine. And a part of my job is to sort through the requests that people bring to our church to get something done to lessen human suffering in whatever little corner of the world it is. And sometimes my job is to find somebody to do that. Other times, really, I just need to go do it. And the figuring out which that is, I think it is an important skill to learn. I'm horrible at it, so I don't have any way to, I don't have anything to offer there. But what Jesus did when he washed those people's feet, his disciples' feet, to me was less demonstrating humility than practicing humility. And I think there's a big difference. I think that just what he is, what he was. At that moment there were dirty feet. He had a towel and some water. There was your answer. And to not second guess that too much is maybe a really good skill to develop.
I think it coaches me to think in any given moment if I have the thought like I don't want to do this job, I'm gonna overlook this and pretend I didn't notice this job needed done. Those feeling like that job's beneath me, like to pay attention when I have those feelings. Sometimes maybe that's exactly what I need to do, and it may be so that I can serve someone else. Like Alan does almost all the laundry in our house, which is awesome. And so every now and then I'll think I should do a load of laundry because I want to be nice to Alan because he does almost all the laundry and I should do some of it.
You're the man, Alan.
He is the man. I'm very lucky. But then sometimes I need to do a job, not necessarily to be kind to others, but because it's good for my own soul, because it nurtures that humility. That like if I'm thinking, I'm going to pretend I don't see that trash so that I don't have to look at or pick it up and someone else does. Exactly what I need for the care of my own soul may be to turn back around and pick up that trash, to remind myself that I shouldn't just wait for someone else to do it.
So what if that piece of trash sits there for a few days? Does that kind of eat at you? Like, so in the parking lot, there's trash in our parking lot frequently. And maybe I'll drive by it one day and then it's still there the next day and it's kind of like eating at me. And I'm like, ah. And then you think about it and you're like, nobody else picked up that piece of trash. But then you have to think about yourself and you're like, well, I didn't pick up that piece of trash either. So I don't know. Yeah.
So I'm going to, do you have something? My thought is half connected.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you think the disciples relived this story? I mean, because we all do that. Like when you sit around like waiting for something interesting to happen, then when it does, you like take it apart. So how do you think the disciples took it apart once Jesus got out of the room? What do you think their impression of what just happened was?
So the best stories, I think, involve a moment you can laugh at, but in part you take serious, right? And so I think this is ripe for that. Like, because don't you imagine they razzed Peter? Like, are you kidding me, Peter? Again? What were you, my whole body? What was that about? And so I imagine them like laughing over that, maybe even like years later, But
Bartholomew, I ain't even washing your feet, dude. Don't even ask me. So,
But then also the seriousness of it. Like I can imagine them remembering it in like hushed tones, or like, what was it like when Jesus washed Judas's feet? Like, because he was still around the table, right? He hadn't bolted yet. And later, after everything, did they retell it and say like, man, he even washed Judas's feet? Like this holy seriousness that they would retell that with.
and it becomes a part of their memory of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I think that because like after that, then every time they see something happen, they go like, I remember now. And I don't know what to compare that to, except that Dell and I had this friend and mentor. I mean, she really was sort of the Jedi master of Jesus stuff. Her name was Ruth Henry, and she was a retired school teacher in Maggie Valley. And from the moment we met her, we just knew we were in the presence of a person who like had figured this out. And she was this curious mixture of like lived in one place all her life and kind of thought like everybody else, and then also took every word that Jesus said as seriously as you can possibly take it and sought to put it in play in her life. And I remember she called me one day and she said, I want you to take some money up and pay a bill so this thing can happen. I don't have permission to tell about this, but it was like, so I went to her house. I went to her house every day because she was like sort of the clearing house of information in our community. So I needed to spend an hour at Ruth's house in order to like collect what I needed for the day. But I went in and I sat down and she said, I need you to do this. And so she reached and she got her pocketbook, and I'll never forget because her pocketbook was a little out of character for her. It was this beaded thing, a little thing. I don't know, just didn't look like the pocketbook that Ruth would have had. And so she opened it up and she reached in and she got out this other tiny little like change purse thing, and it was plastic and red and white. And I just remember in my brain thinking, wow, I wouldn't have thought that either. And then she opened it up and she took out this little wad of money that she had already counted and had put a paper clip on it and handed it to me and gave me my instructions. And it wasn't until I left and unwrapped it all. I mean, there was a huge amount of money in that paperclip. Money that she had worked for all her life, money that she had saved, and now money that she was giving away to someone that I might not have done it. I don't know. And just now, after that, it changed forever the way I look at a billfold or a pocketbook or a change purse. I mean, it doesn't matter which one it is now. I remember, and I'll forever be in Ruth's debt for that moment when she did this thing. She changed me as a human being right there in a way that I guess she'll hear this. She's going on the church triumphant. But I think maybe this is one of those moments for those disciples. After that, every time somebody touched them with a towel.
Well, and so it redefines the way we look at a towel and basin, just like that redefines the way that you looked at a billfold. And what else can it redefine? And also, what she did by paying that bill kind of loosely connects to my half-formed thought that I had a minute ago. I've been thinking a lot about like systems and the way that like it's not just the impact of one individual on another, but one system on others. And so it's not just one person in a society, like in that singular room that would have been a servant's job, but in a society there are groups of people that we keep in servants' roles, so to speak, right? And so that on a larger scale, we might see the foot washing story as a call to look out for those that we are in hierarchical positions over, and to see how we can flip that. You know, the kingdom of God is a kingdom of role reversals. And so how can we work to flip some of those roles, to provide means for those who are constantly trapped in for lack of a better term, like servants' roles in our society, and to provide ways, whether it's by paying bills or offering scholarships or just making friendships or whatever, create paths to disrupt all that. So that it's not the same people as servants and the same people in higher up positions all the time.
Do you work with the younger people here?
I do.
Okay. Could you venture a guess how this story might translate into your work with them? What you want them to learn?
Yeah. So I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And so just raising them to be kind little people is kind of my parenting goal. And I want to do it in a way where they don't feel like they're better or that they have to because they have more. I want them to do it because they genuinely want to, through the love of Jesus, and to know that Jesus did it for us and we should do it for people. And that Jesus lived a life that we need to model. And I think this story really ties in with that. My daughter, we did a drive-through vacation Bible school a couple weeks ago. And she's been to this church's Bible school before, and she was like, are we doing the can drive again? Because I loved that. And so she just really has a sweet little servant heart, and I want to continue to nurture that. I think it's important.
And the way you said that, like Jesus did it for us, and so we do it for others. It's almost like Jesus has, there's that old like chicken and the egg scenario, like which comes, sometimes you just need something to start it. It doesn't matter what came first, but you need something to come first. And it's almost like Jesus washed our feet, and so we serve. We've already been served, so we serve. Jesus sacrificed us, for us, so we sacrifice for others. Jesus showed us grace and forgiveness, and so we show grace and forgiveness to others. We are already on the receiving end so that we're able to pass it on.
So what I hope has happened in these last 4 weeks when we talked about Jesus stories, and we did all different kinds, are we demonstrated Jesus demonstrates several things for us. His fearlessness at times, which doesn't mean that he wasn't afraid. His bravery, I guess was what I'd say. Doesn't mean he wasn't afraid, but he also was willing to wade into the place he needed to go to get the work done. And then in this case, Jesus' humility, which here is tied, I believe, to his wisdom, where he looks at something that needs to happen, and he looks around for a half a second and realizes he's the best person to do it at that moment and just does it. And it doesn't really change the world. He got their feet clean. But in a way, it does change the world, which maybe causes us to wonder, does every good thing we do, in a way, change the world in some molecular fashion? That's what I hoped that we would accomplish when we had these little conversations, and I'm really grateful to you. I'm suggesting that it's over, and I don't know if it is or not, but
I have a question.
Yeah.
Rochelle asked, do you think the servants were watching the whole scene, and what do you think they were thinking?
Is it Rochelle said that? Yeah. Oh, okay. Hey, Rochelle. What I think is, forgive me for too long an answer. I think Peter's over there trying to figure out how it fits into his job as the leader of the servants, the Jesus servants. So he's doing that. And I think that there's probably Matthew, the tax collector, who is watching this unfold, and he's really used to somebody washing his feet because he's a rich dude. And he's like, wonder if Jesus is any good at this. And then there's probably Bartholomew, who was maybe the sort of, well, for want of a better word, the craziest of all the disciples. And he's like, man, this is great. I love this. Thanks, Jesus. So I think it probably depended on who was experiencing it at that moment. And there was Philip. And I think Philip probably had to work really hard not to just bust out in tears at that moment, because he was the sort of sensitive one.
Well, I wonder, what if there was an actual servant in the room? Like, because my understanding is you didn't have to be a super rich house for there to be, often there was a servant who did this job. And what if Jesus, the servant was getting up to do it, and Jesus said, no, I'm going to do it. And then the servant sits back and watches while Jesus goes around.
Here's what I hope happened. I hope Jesus washed that servant's feet first.
Yeah.
I hope he just said, here's what I'm going to do for all y'all.
And talk about a story that gets retold. He that day would go back to his buddies and say, you would not believe what happened today. And when I think about, so right after this, Jesus will tell his disciples that he's giving them a new command to love one another. And that's how people will know that you're my followers, if you love one another. And I always think that, in order for people to know that we are Jesus followers by our love, you got to love in a big way. I can't be just a little bitty kind of love, because lots of people love like that. It has to be a radical love. And this would have been an act that would have been so different. I think that's the kind of service that we're looking for in everyday life, to serve in a way that's that person has to be a Jesus follower in order to step in and tell me, no, you don't wash the feet, I'm going to do it.
I hope that's a good enough answer, Rochelle. Rochelle has a
It's a good question.
Brand new grandbaby. Her name's Luna, and she's beautiful. Okay.
Oh, Rochelle says that's what I was thinking, or that's what I was asking. And Mary Schlegel's sad that this is the last one in the series. But you never know. We had Acts Live, and then it resurrected to Jesus stories. So we might be back again. It's just hard to say.
As long as we're apart, as long as we can't meet face to face, this is one of the things that we have tried to do together. And I'm so grateful to first Silva and to Mary and to Jessica and all the other people who have participated. This is a way we can continue to be together, study the story, ask questions, connect. If you have ideas or suggestions, call Mary and she'll turn it into a plan, and then she'll call me. Thank you.
Well, and so along those lines, one of the reasons I keep doing this is that, I don't know how many people really watch it, but I get a lot out of talking about the Bible with David and with Jessica. And so at a time when we can't get together and have a 21st person Bible study in person, it's just not practical. But that doesn't mean that you can't call up a friend of yours, and say, hey, would you let's read through the Gospel of John together, one chapter at a time, and talk about it together. There's nothing preventing you from doing that and getting as much joy out of doing that with a friend of yours as we get out of talking about it here. So there's always a way. Do we have anything else to talk about?
We are very grateful to all of you who joined us today, and to those of you who will join us after this goes, whatever after live is. Thank you.
And I am always grateful to Duncan, who does a great job. He's got 3 cameras set up for us here, making us look good here today. So a big thank you to Duncan for helping us out.
We would turn a camera and take his picture, but this is all really expensive looking stuff, and I don't think he wants us to do that. But thank you, Duncan.
David, would you say a prayer for us to close us out? Or should we make Jessica?
Go ahead, David.
Will you pray with me? On that night, at the end of so many things that you had taught the disciples, when you took off your coat and took upon yourself the role of a servant, became one, you taught us some things. May they not be lost on us. May the importance of what you did there not be lost on us. Help us to be good servants, Lord, to look around for the things that need to be cleaned up. thank you for the opportunity to come here and be with our friends and to study and learn and share. Thank you for the people who listened. Be with us until we're able to meet again. We make our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, Face.